Welcome to episode 47 of Think Big with Michael Zellner, all positive, no politics. My guest today is Brad Carson. Brad is the brand and operations manager at 92.9 ESPN and 790 The Bet here in Memphis, Tennessee. He has been with ESPN Radio now for a little bit over 18 years. And under his leadership, the station has done extremely well and has been a Marconi nominee for Sports Station of the Year 3 of the last 5 years. And WMFS 92.9 ESPN Radio is also the #1 rated Nielsen Sports Station for people from ages 25 to 54, Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Brad, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing great. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Tell us something interesting about yourself most people don't know.
Here's a good one. Today on the radio show, we were talking about one of the Grizzlies. David Roddy plays saxophone. And we were talking about it on the radio show, and they're like, do you play an instrument, Brad? And I say, well, I play saxophone. So that would probably be the one that's most recent from today's radio show that popped up. Played in the Dixieland band in high school, played in marching band, played alto, played tenor, even played baritone a little bit. So that's kind of a random thing for a radio guy, I guess.
That's awesome. It's something I never knew about you.
Yeah.
So you grew up in central Illinois in a small city, Mount Olive. What are some of the fun things you remember about your childhood there?
Well, we had to create our own fun, which is probably why I got into radio, because I was one of those. I went to a school that had 42 kids in my high school graduating class. So you have to create your own energy. There were no stoplights in the whole county. You'd cruise Main Street for fun, and Main Street was only 1 mile because the town was only 1 mile square. So you'd hit the gas station on one end and go to the gas station on the other. But my wife and I joke about it because it's a little Pollyanna. It's a little Mayberry. Obviously Chicago's at the top of the state, but there's 9 hours south of Chicago of lots of rural areas like Iowa or Missouri. But it was a pretty sheltered existence, not a diverse existence. Small town. The people in the football team, you'd put down the helmet. The linebacker would put the helmet down and grab a tuba to do the halftime performance in the band. So that's the kind of deal I grew up with. And I probably got into radio as a result of it because I was always a pretty energetic dude. I wasn't great at sports, although I played a lot of sports and had an opportunity to play a lot because everybody had to play in order to have a team. But at that time it was the Sony Walkman, and you'd be on a bus on the way back from a high school basketball game in central Illinois playing some bum high school team, and they'd play the games back on tape delay. So I'd listen to the game that we just played in, and they're like, and Brad shoots from the key for 3 and misses, and was like, this is so cool. So just coming up with ways to have fun. We weren't rolling houses like my wife's family did in the South for what the kids do. It was more about, my dad had an excavating business, so I did a lot of working for my father, doing septic systems and pushing snow in the winter. I made a little money doing that. My father is an entrepreneurial kind of cat, so he had a couple of car washes. I would clean car wash vacuums to get extra pocket change in school. So sort of entrepreneurial days, fun days, and I have really fond memories of growing up in a small town in Illinois. So Mount Olive was great for me.
I have memories of rolling houses, and like your wife did, and egging cars.
In fact, my son is in high school, and I had our first rolling. It felt like Toomer's Corner in Auburn all of a sudden at my house the other day. I was like, well, I guess Jake is in high school now, so
absolutely.
I'm there.
So Brad, your first real job was setting pins at Turner Hall in Mount Olive. What was that like?
Yeah, so believe it or not, and there's only a few of these that still exist around the country. There are bowling lanes that have not automated pin setting, like a machine that just does it for you. There's an actual human behind the thing that pulls the lever it has electric, so it lowers the 10 pins, sets them down, and it'll go up. And then the guy has to get on the stool, so you get up on the stool like this. The dude bowls, or the lady bowls. You get down, pull the lever, you put the pins I'm doing this because visual is a little easier with the camera. And then you put the pins in the rack, you lower them, and then you put the ball up from the alley on the little thing, and it goes back to the bowler so they can bowl again.
Wow.
But Dave Scheller, I remember this one bowler, Dave Scheller, everybody would really get back because he was really good, and the pins would bounce higher, and you might get hurt getting hit by a pin. But It paid $5 a game, and you get a free candy bar and a free soda for setting pins. So there again, small town Midwest, you know, you got these, bowling was a big deal, especially in the winter, and they had leagues and the kids would set pins. I think I've done some internet research in my spare time, and there's a few of those that still exist. There's probably one in Tennessee, I bet, that still has automated lanes with kids or adults who set pins.
Probably in a small town similar to how you grew up.
Probably, I bet Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or Wisconsin has all the beer joints and the, you know, hole in the wall bars, and there's a lot of that still exists up there in the Midwest, you know.
Very cool. You know, for someone who grew up here in Memphis and completely different end of the spectrum, it's really neat to hear stories like that.
Yeah, well, and I will say I love bowling. So like Billy Hardwick's, which is around the corner from the station here. Love Billy Hardwick's because it's like bowler's paradise. Lots of lanes, clean. And I think there's Bees in Bartlett. So there's a few pretty good bowling places here in the area.
Definitely are. And I grew up going to Billy Hardwick, and there used to be Imperial bowling lanes on Summer Avenue. That was fun too. So good times.
Absolutely.
You know, you've talked about how your love of radio started as a child, listening to music in the car at your house with your parents, and, you know, in the car and at your house with your parents. Mm-hmm. I believe your dad listened to country music and news, and your mom liked the hits. You also grew up listening to legendary St. Louis Cardinals broadcaster Jack Buck. What effect did all of that have on you?
So it's sort of like osmosis. You just see, I think a lot of us, probably like yourself, you're a product of your upbringing and what you're around and what you're exposed to, you know, and you're probably around my age. And when you don't have phones, lots of computers, it's funny, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, because when I was in college and in graduate school, it was microfilm and microfiche. And now they're like, my son's like, what film, you know, and you'd go in the library, you know, but a lot of that stuff from when I was a kid, it just sort of seeps in. My mother would listen to Y98 out of St. Louis. In fact, don't tell anybody, but I stole the microphone flag when I was an intern there.
That's awesome.
Got it out of the promotions closet. But I was an intern at Y98 in St. Louis, because once I got into college, I'd listened to that. That was the FM 100 of St. Louis, still is, you know, and instead of it being Ron Olson like it is in Memphis, it was a guy named Guy Phillips, and it was a show called Phillips and Company. And my mother was just a loyal listener of Phillips and Company and Michelle Dibble, and she would talk about them. So you're sitting in the passenger seat on a really short car ride, and you're like, that must mean something to her, you know. And then here's Phil Collins on Y98, and then they're telling stories about the '96 Olympics. And then I found myself in college in communication, and I was like, maybe I should intern there. So it seeps in every morning. You're driving to school, you're in the car with your mom going to the orthodontist, which is a little bit of a drive. And then for my dad, who's a beer drinking sort of, like I said, he's a different kind of cat. He's a, you know, Vietnam vet, farmer, loved the old AM country sound and in his pickup truck. And that was part of my sort of upbringing to fondness for country music. And in the Midwest, it's funny, Gary here on 92.9, who does our afternoon show, Gary Parrish, was talking about how he grew up WOR and Superstation TV was starting in the late 80s, early 90s, and he was a Mets fan because of that. And in the Midwest, it's really hard to describe that. First of all, they didn't have the Superstation TV. You know, there was no Bally Sports with the Cardinals deal like the Grizzlies have here, where it's sort of on all the place. Cardinal radio with Jack Buck, and I have my office is littered with all the stuff. It just was on everywhere. I can't describe it. And there's so many of these stations, and they've been able to market the Cardinal brand for years, because if you drive, like here, we have it on 790 on WMCAM. It was on in Memphis, though, back 30, 40 years ago. It was on, you drive north, you're going to hear it in Jonesboro. You're going to hear it in Dyersburg. You're going to hear it in Cape Girardeau up north going 55. You're going to hear it in St. Louis, and then you're going to hear it past another 2 hours. And there's this massive circle. So it wasn't just the major footprint in your hometown. It was everywhere. It was just always on. You'd go to the store, the gas station at 7 o'clock at night, and you just hear that sort of echo in the background. And that, you know, here's the pitch, and it's Jack Buck, you know, and it's in there. And that's the only way I can describe it. It's all of those things kind of lead you to make that part of your childhood memory and growing up around radio. And for me, that was kind of the story with Jack Buck and music radio as well.
You got your bachelor's degree in organizational communication from North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, and you worked at Pure Rock WONC FM 89.1, the college radio station there. You said, quote, "When I toured the college and saw WONC FM and the college students running the whole thing and doing radio shows, it was over. That's where I wanted to be," unquote. You set your roots there, and obviously it had a huge impact on your life, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, for all of us, there's a moment in our life where in your career or your married life, you meet that person. For my wife, I met her at a Super Bowl party, and I'll never forget that. It just boom. For me, when I was looking at colleges, and I looked at University of Illinois, which is a big college, obviously, Big Ten school, and there's all. I kind of decided I wanted to go to a smaller school. Around here we have Rhodes, we have Christian Brothers. North Central is probably a lot like those schools, smaller, 2,000-3,000 kids. So that I had that in my mind. But then I had this radio thing in my head because I called into radio stations. I filled out postcards trying to win contests on Q in St. Louis for the top 40 station at the time when I was in high school. I went to concerts. So I knew I liked radio, and there was no multimedia at that time. Now, guys or ladies that go to college and want in this field, they go into multimedia. They go into sports radio management. There's
Right.
these umbrella sports information directors at colleges, guys that have worked with me over the years have gone into those things, but I've got guys that have just gone into music out of high school, like Chris Malone, who's now a program director for Stevie Wonder's radio station in Los Angeles, worked here with me. Everybody's background is different, but for me, first of all, I went into organizational communication, which is basically business, and I had a theater minor because I didn't think it was ever going to be a real career for me. I don't think you go into this thinking this is going to happen. So you immediately, even when I was 18, I thought, I need to do this. I need to be careful here because I knew what I was up against, even as an 18-year-old going to college for this. And I wanted to still make money as a college graduate at some point. And that could have been marketing, that could have been promotions or sales or something like that. So I went in and I started working at the college radio station. But when I saw North Central College's radio station, WONC, it was at the top of this building called Old Main. They moved it into its own house later on when I was in school. But I couldn't believe it. It was just like magic. And they were still cutting tape. They didn't have CDs or now digital. We have no CDs here at the radio station. Everything's digital. It was like Hollywood to me as a young 17-year-old seeing this radio station in this up at the top floor of this building with a big tower, and they had an AP wire, and they had a music director, and they had all these records on the wall, and they had a sports department that was calling high school and college games. And so I was one of those rare people also that had a passion for music and sports and really all of it. I couldn't get enough of all of it, probably wasn't good enough at any one of them. So I just was sort of a generalist. And I think the theater part of it at college also has been valuable for my career because not that I'm some thespian. I mean, I did a Mammoth one-act play, and I got to do some unique things in college as an undergraduate at North Central. And that was a great school for me. But the radio station is what I fell in love with, that first view of seeing that place,
You did just about everything in radio when you started out. I think you were reading farm reports, obituaries, even, county fairs. You came from very humble beginnings in radio. What did that teach you?
I was the best. I was the number one minimum wage paid disc jockey in Illinois for 4 consecutive years. So it was quite a deal. And that's not an exaggeration, by the way. I've told this story before. So I made minimum wage from the age of 18 to 22 doing radio at Litchfield, Illinois. And the owners, that's hard to do, by the way. I'm not picking on the owners when I say that story. That's just the reality of small town business. I was happy to have a job. And at that time it was $4.25 or whatever. About 2 years into the job, and I was working summers and winters while I wasn't up by Chicago. Naperville's up by Chicago. So I was in Southern Illinois where I grew up. I was working at WSMI. and the owner's name is Hayward Talley. He brought me into his office, and he always had a suit coat and tie, so you're already intimidated. Minimum wage paid disc jockey walks into Hayward's office, and he's like, Brad, I want to let you know you're doing a really terrific job here. The radio station, we're going to bring your pay up from $425 to $450. So I go home and I tell my dad. My dad's like, Brad, minimum wage went up 25 cents. So I don't know if you want to look at that as a raise or not, but so it was nice to still get the meeting with Mr. Talley.
That's really funny. Well, that's a great story.
Yeah.
So after, starting your career in Illinois, you were in several different places, talked about St. Louis, Las Vegas, Atlantic City. You were even a graduate assistant at UNLV and got your master's degree in mass communication while you were there. How did working at all those places prepare you for what you're doing today here in Memphis?
I think it made me more resilient and to try to break through barriers. Much like you doing this podcast, I think, as you've learned probably, if you ask many times, you get. And I think that's what I learned. And I graduated early from college, and I was 21, and I thought I wanted to go to graduate school because I still at that point, I'm making minimum wage, and I didn't think radio was a real job. Okay. So you're 21 years old with a college degree, and you're faced with, okay, figuring out how to parlay that into your first career opportunity, real job. I was single at the time, obviously, and I'm just getting started. Or do I go to graduate school because maybe I want to teach this, or just figure out how I can do more with this degree or whatnot? And I had an opportunity. It's funny, I really wanted to go to the University of Florida. And it's now that I'm here in the South and my wife went to Mississippi State, I'm always thought, I don't have any regrets about not going to the University of Florida. The first go around, I didn't get accepted because it's really hard to get in. At the time, it was hard to get in Gainesville, and my scores on my GRE were okay. But I wrote them a letter and I said, here's why you're wrong for not letting me in. And they let me in. And then I figured out really quickly, it's going to cost me like $15,000 a year to go to Gainesville, to go to graduate school at the University of Florida. And at the same time, I was a huge, growing up, ESPN was in its heyday when we were in high school. And of course, Jerry Tarkanian and the UNLV Running Rebels was everything, because I played basketball and I'd stay up late and I'd watch these Big West games on TV. So my dad actually used to go to car wash conventions, bring back UNLV swag. So I had UNLV stuff I was all about the Running Rebels. And I thought, man, it'd be really cool to go to UNLV coming from the Midwest. I'm 21 now. So I sent them my stuff. And not only did they accept me, but they gave me a graduate assistantship and they gave me an office and they were going to pay me to go to graduate school. And I'm like, I got to do that.
Right.
So that's so 21, and I left to go to Las Vegas, and I got an apartment out there. And I sent an air check out to a radio station as soon as I got out there, and I got a radio job at the same time. And I don't know how that happened. I think a lot of it was my internship in St. Louis and my experience. And so I was 21 and I was a disc jockey in Las Vegas, Nevada, doing overnights on a station called Mix, which was the big station, still is the big station out there. And teaching undergraduates public speaking during the day and going to school to get my master's degree. So it was a unique deal, doing car remotes on the weekends and then teaching mass comm on Tuesdays, but I really got an education doing that out there, as you can imagine, being a 21-year-old in Las Vegas in the mid to late 90s.
Tarkanian years were so great. I mean, he was such an awesome, charismatic coach. Early 90s, especially, those teams were so good. Him with the towel in his mouth, and those games with Duke, and oh man, such great memories.
It was great. I mean, because I don't think we'd ever seen explosives or like pyro inside of a stadium like that at a college basketball game with 18,000 people, and Tark, like you said, he had the towel. So it was cool as heck, because Larry Johnson, now I realize, might have been a little rough around the edges for some. For me, it was awesome. It was right. Hollywood, and they're playing Long Beach State at 11 o'clock at night. And I was just like, I'm just watching ESPN thinking this is the coolest thing ever, Michael. So
it was fun, good fun memories I'll always have for sure.
Yeah.
You said, quote, throughout my career, I have found that quality local content, information, and entertainment in the form of music, news, or play-by-play is what defines success, unquote. Tell us a little bit about that and what it means to you.
yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with local stories and storytelling and fun and things that affect me and you living in Memphis. And I think we learned that over the last couple of weeks with some of the more difficult stories we've had. Good positive stories, not only like this podcast, but the ones that we tell every day on 92.9. And it's funny, we had we often talk with other program directors around the country here, because I work for a company called Odyssey that owns 92.9. And Odyssey owns probably the biggest sports stations around the country: WFAN, KMOX in St. Louis, the Fan in Cleveland, all the WIP in Philadelphia. And a lot of the program directors will talk to me and they'll listen, and it's like nothing else around the country. And that's by design, I think, because people here care more about basketball generally than any other sport. Right. I think we have baseball with the AAA Redbirds and people like the Cardinals, but it's not the biggest thing here, whereas a lot of markets are about baseball. And so that's one example, right? Having lived here, the Tigers, it started with the Tigers, it started with Gene Bartow, it went to Penny, and then the Grizzlies arrived, and there's nothing like this. And that's why I think, like Rob Fisher called it Hoop City, and I think he's right. This is a market that is really about basketball. And for every community, we're not different in a sense than any other community, but every community has their thing. We were talking about Las Vegas. It's the obvious thing there is casino industry, and it's not necessarily sports even in Vegas, even though they have Major League Sports. It's a transient town. Living in Atlantic City, it was the shore. It was about the beach, and you're nearby Philadelphia, so it's all about the Eagles. They're not about college football in New Jersey. So in the Midwest, it was baseball. So every place that I've lived, what I've learned is you need to tell the story of that place, and it's the people that make it, and it's a one-on-one relationship almost with you can't understand it unless you're in that city. And I think for Memphis, those are some of the things that make us unique.
So you get the job here in Memphis in December of 2004, I believe. And, how did that come about for you? And what do you remember most about your beginning years at 92.9?
When I came to Memphis in 2004, I was programming a station called The Shore in Atlantic City. And it was a format that was really big at the time. In the early 2000s, it's kind of like, they called it pop alternative, which is like contemporary rock for women. Nickelback, The Calling, that was a really big genre. Creed, the Goo Goo Dolls, Train is part of that. Some of those artists are still around, but the truth is that format was short-lived. It lasted about until 2004, 2005, and at the time we were about to buy FM 100 as a company, and I was coming here to work for 94.1. To back up a second, so I was going from The Shore, and I had two job offers. I had one job offer to be the program director at Sirius XM for the Heart and the Blend, which is sort of their FM 100 and River of the Sirius XM world back in 2004. And I remember I interviewed in DC, got offered the job. I was actually going to get more money to go work there, and I turned it down because I wanted to work at the Buzz at the time. And so the Buzz was the pop alternative station, was doing very well. Very successful, been on for about 4 years. And I was brought in to start on the morning show with Dana Fox, and did that for 2 years. And then we did afternoons for another year. And it worked out really well. It was just at the end of a music cycle, and we were about to buy FM 100, and our world was changing at the time. Music cycle was really changing then. And a lot of those songs were going away, and pop music was becoming a lot bigger, rap music. And so we had to switch formats. So we put on a station called Snap for about a year. And the best thing that came out of that station was probably Chris Malone, who I was telling you about earlier, who's in Los Angeles, who helped me program the station. And then about a year later, we put on a classic hit station that did really well. And we did that for about 6-7 years, very successful. The problem was we were biting off the river too much, which is another one of the stations that is in our building. So they're like, we need to do something else. And we put country on. But in the midst of that, we put 92.9 on. And so that's sort of the beginning. 2004, I came here to work at the Buzz, and I was really known in the industry as a music programmer because I'd done sports and I'd done talk in my full service early career. But I was if you would have branded me, you'd say Brad's a music programmer. He's a morning host. He's a DJ, and he's one of those guys. And I still do some of that.
You said, quote, Dan Barron, our GM, understood that ESPN brand gave us an opportunity to quickly take an ownership position, unquote. Tell us a little bit about Dan and the vision you guys have had together for the station.
Well, it was Dan's vision. There's no doubt about that, because I had no idea that they were going to ask me to do this. It was Dan's idea to bring me on to be the program director at 92.9. And that was in 2009. And he had just hired Gary and me at the same time. He said, let me introduce you to Gary Parrish. And that was one of the best things that we did, was start with Gary and lay a foundation for that. Gary and Jeff. Jeff, it was also part of that. It was just a little smaller role because he was coming on by phone and was also working at the commercial appeal. But Dan had a vision when he put this ESPN station on, and we started it just on 680, which it's still on. And then we decided baby step one was going to be to put it on 92.9 and give us an FM platform, which nobody had done at the time. And there are others that have done it since we've done it. But we were the first to say, okay. And this is when Stern was coming off the air. Right. Alternative was sort of going away, even though we got death threats when we took 93X off. Because there's always a small, even if there's 10 people, it's a small angry group. So we still got the things, but no, it went well. We put it on 92.9. It was simulcast, and we started with Gary's show, and Dan brought me aboard. And I think Dan had a vision by starting with an ESPN station, because to most people, ESPN means sports, and we run it in a local way. We put our own spin on it, obviously, with local shows and local imaging and local stories and everything that we do. But that was the beginning, and Dan, that was Dan's vision. And I'm grateful that he brought me on, because honestly, when he brought me into his office, and radio sometimes, as you know, is the job where you go into the office and you don't know what you're going to be told, whether you're flipping a format or going away.
Right.
And I honestly, I don't know if I wanted the job. But anybody who knows me knows that I'm pretty enthusiastic about giving it my best. And I think I told Dan, I said, I'll do this if you think I should do this, and if you want me to do this. And he really wanted me to do it, and I wanted to do it. And I'm a passionate sports fan. He knew that. And so I learned more about how to do it for Memphis. And I think a lot of that credit goes to Gary, because Gary, having grown up here, learned a lot from him, and from Jeff, having been here for a long time as the longtime columnist, and then building from that foundation. But it did start with Dan bringing me to his office and say, you want to program a sports station?
Awesome. So in 2012, Chris Vernon joined ESPN Radio to your powerful lineup. You already had, I believe, Eric Hasseltine and Gary Parrish at the time. So from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., you had what could be considered in sports radio as the big three, on your station. Is it around that time where everything started to really fall into place and took off for the station?
It was because, and we had to convince some of the powers that be to take a leap of faith to add both shows, because, it's an investment. We were doing pretty well with Cowherd and middays, and we had the ESPN lineup. And I think people were asking, the obvious question is, when are you going to add more local shows? That's the obvious thing. We still get that, but our morning show does very well, and it's the ESPN morning show with Keyshawn. And so you're always going to get that. Even if it's successful, you'll always get questions about things that are successful. But
right.
We were obviously more successful when we added Eric's show to begin with, and then we put Vernon's show on before that, starting at 11 back in 2000. That was 12. And we were adding the Grizzlies at about the same time too. So those three moves, I think, took us to the next level. That, whoa, but it wasn't easy at the time. I will tell you, there were many dinners and many convincing things. But even though we were building it organically, the house was still being built. So it was, Gary had laid out this terrific foundation with Jeff. Eric being part of the Grizzlies, that was a natural fit to add Eric's show, because he was part of the Grizzlies, still is. And that was an important relationship and an important piece to the puzzle. And then obviously Chris Vernon's show being our first 3-hour show, and taking the chunk of the midday and coming from AM. Chris was coming from AM to FM too. So I think it was a great opportunity for us to have him on the station.
Brad, you've been listed by Barrett Sports Media as, quote, the best mid-market sports programmer in America. What does that mean to you?
Um, that means somebody's messed up out there. They got the they got the wrong guy. No, I think that that's really a credit to all the guys we were just talking about, and to it's just like any business. If the team does well, all boats rise together. So it's been an opportunity to be here. I'm happy just to come into work and get to do this. And I don't think we would get to do that if we weren't doing those things. So I think it's a credit to everybody, and really everybody's been recognized by Barrett, that same place you mentioned. Gary's been #1 for afternoon shows. All 3 of our midday shows have been listed. Station has been #1 before. So it's good to collectively be recognized like that.
So it's September of 2017, and Chris Vernon leaves the station. You know, his show was really popular at the time, and you guys have a big void to fill. And you guys ultimately decided to go with, Jason Smith and John Martin, who both had never hosted their own sports radio talk show before. Ultimately it proved to be another home run for you and the station. They gel very well together. They have a great show every day from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Tell us about the Jason and John that and why you feel they haven't missed a beat, following Vernon and have been so successful.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've known both of them. Jason had made guest appearances on Vernon's show for years. So
Right.
I had heard it over and over again for several years. And I really liked Jason as a person. Jason, and for anybody who's gotten to know Jason Smith, he's a terrific talent and easy to work with. And those are 2 things you can't really replicate. If you're easy to work with, coachable, and have a talent like Jason's talent, where he's a great storyteller, and worked his way up from preps to covering University of Memphis Tigers basketball. And that still is one of the hot topics, along with the Grizzlies. He had those 3 recipes: easy to work with, coachable, great voice, talent, energy. Clearly had talked on the radio, so we knew he could do it. And then John, same thing. He had worked on Jeff Calkins' show as a producer since the beginning of Jeff's show, which we added just a couple of years later after adding Vernon's show. We brought Jeff on from just being a guest on Gary's show to having his own full 2-hour radio show. And really, Jeff made it clear the only way he would do it is if John Martin was the producer. And as most of these guys are, we take their lead and run with it. He was right about that. John was terrific and knocked it out of the park. And he was really just a really good, energetic person on that show, really a positive presence, could host the show. We saw him host that show several times,
right,
when Jeff was gone. So we knew both of them could host a radio show. And we thought that to pair them together was the absolute home run, taking 2 great talent like that. And it's funny, I played pickup basketball with both of them over at Woodland Presbyterian. We're just around the corner here from the radio station, and got a chance to see them interact. So I kind of had done, I think my boss and Dan and I talked about it. We saw them interact. We had all of the things we needed to put it together. And I think it worked out pretty well.
So something I found out interesting about you is that you are a national voiceover person, and you not only do radio during the week, but your weekends are sometimes filled with radio too. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So as I said, I moonlight as a disc jockey. We do some Odyssey is the company I work for. So they've allowed me to do work on a rock station in Madison, Wisconsin called Triple M, which is sort of a adult leaning rock AAA station, album oriented rock station. They play everything from Led Zeppelin to Dermot Kennedy. And that's my favorite format. And I'd never had a chance to do it. And a friend of mine programs the station, and they asked me to do a weekend show. So I do some of that. I've got a mic rig and set up at home. And then, as we talked about on the interview here, my dad being the country music fan, and I had done country in my early career. That was also part of my repertoire. So when we put The Wolf on, and I'd taken a step back from doing as much music, because the sports thing, after all these shows that we've grown and also producing and doing things, it's taken most of my focus away from music, but I still do a weekend show on The Wolf. And then there's a company called GCV out of New Jersey that I struck up a relationship over the years with, doing some voiceovers for them, and just, piecemeal stuff like this, concert spots. And having come from New Jersey, there's some friends there that have some businesses, and I voice their stuff and just try to keep my foot in it. It's just part of the repertoire to stay busy and have some fun.
How do you balance between life and work?
Turn off my phone and try to ignore social media, sort of like we talked about before the interview here. I think the internet and social media and phones are a wonderful thing. They really help programming a radio station, because I have a Rolodex of 4,000 people on my phone now that used to be in like a card catalog thing, when I keep track of guests, whether it's SEC coaches. And so now all of that is right here, but then you got to put it away. And I think that's the hardest thing, because we have text chains to keep track of what's going on in the radio station as a producer group and as show groups. But I think, and I've really worked hard with my 14-year-old on this. Jake didn't get a cell phone until he was 13. He probably doesn't want me telling people a lot of that, but I think it helped his development a little bit, because I think our young people are obsessed with it a little bit. And right. So I'm no different. And it's easy. It's wonderful, right? They have the satellite right in your pocket. They could launch a rocket ship, and all of your contacts and your friends are on there, and these great pictures and videos of your vacations or whatever you want. And we no longer talk to each other or ask questions, because, well, if you wanted to know how many people go to school at Tennessee, you can just look it up on your phone. Right. You don't have to ask another person, which is what we sort of used to do at the bar. It is weird when you go into a bar or restaurant and people aren't talking to each other, they're on their phone. So I think I'm no different. It's like, I think trying to set it down a little bit and focus is helpful, but I'm not perfect. I still mess around on it. And now wagering has made that even more interesting, right? Because in the sports betting space, just scheduling time. My wife and my family is my main priority, though, and I make no bones about it. I think people that really know me know that's my number one focus. And I don't think I could have more than one child, though, because it's hard enough having one.
I was just talking to somebody the other day about, 15 years ago, going to TJ Mulligan's Fox and Hound, and this is before the smartphones. I think smartphones, I want to say, came out in 2009 or 10.
That sounds right.
And people were talking, people were having fun, people were interacting. But you're right, it's completely different now. Even when families go out to dinner and they're sitting at a table, they're all on their phones.
Yeah. And the thing I've been thinking about as my son gets older, because they say the high school years go fast, and they do. It's like, it's the kids put your life in fast forward. I think phones and technology really put life in fast forward in some ways. And I don't know if that's healthy or not. I'm sure that there's a research psychologist who's probably watching or listening to this podcast who's shaking their head. And I think there's been research on this. Whether it's timelines on your Facebook that pop up from 6 years ago that remind you of that was 6 years ago. And you're like, wow, that seems like it was either shorter or longer than that. Or, man, I don't want that to be 6 years ago. That's, or I'm at this age in my life, and what's the next, I think we're all buzzing. We're all buzzing, and we're looking for the next adrenaline shot. And so it is harder to slow down, I think. And I know your friend Greg Graber, who talks about mindfulness, who's been on this podcast a lot. Right. This is what he specializes in. I think young people especially need to focus on that. And you do have to slow down, and you have to put the technology away as part of that. So I didn't mean to make this a mindfulness moment, but
no, it's okay. It's always good to have one of those.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier about WMFS being the #1 rated Nielsen Sports Station in the country for people, 25 to 54. It's also, top 10 station overall in men 25 to 54 in America too. For a 6,000 watt station, that's just amazing. What do you believe has led to the overall success?
Well, what fuels those numbers is time spent listening. I'm telling you an obvious thing, but when you're dealing with a station in a town the size of Memphis, and you're trying to get the word out, we have a lot of listeners. We probably have anywhere from 75,000 to 100,000, which is a lot. But if you think of it relative to Liberty Bowl, that's only 10 to 20,000 more that would fit in at once in the Liberty Bowl if it were full.
Right.
And I think about that a lot. The difference is that unlike most of the music stations, really any station in the country, and we're one of the top time spent listening stations in the country, if not close to number one. And there are several stations in Memphis like that, especially on the music side. But for us, listeners like you, hopefully, and anybody watching this, listen to 92.9, both men and women of all ages, between 18 and 54 and older. We don't exclude anybody. It's free to everybody. If you want to listen on the Odyssey app or ask your smart speaker to play 92.9 ESPN, those things have helped too, right? Smart speakers.
Right.
The apps, that helps get us out there and helps the ratings. But it's because of guys like Gary, Jason and John, Giannato and Jeffrey, and Jeff's show, and even the ESPN product. That product, Keyshawn's show, people are passionate about hearing Keyshawn talk about his nephew who plays for the Saints and why he's a Saints homer right now, and when Jay Williams comes in to do a local event with us at 360 in Collierville and shoots hoops with some kids from the Boys and Girls Club, that's a connection that means something. And so folks tend to listen longer to us, I think, and that's helped fuel all that.
And I can say this, categorically into the audience, that the best decision that I ever made advertising was to start advertising on ESPN radio. I had more people come in my store, Sleepy Z's at the time, from ESPN radio than any other advertising source that I had. And, we had it playing at the store over the speakers and branded it well there. But I tell people, if you're looking for something, a station to advertise on and advertise on radio, start with ESPN on sports radio, because it works.
Excellent. It does work. I appreciate that. And I tell people that all the time, because people are also looking for, especially business owners, are looking for a quick solution. And the truth is, there are a few quick steroid shot solutions to your business where you just big direct mailer that's expensive, and radio can be expensive, but you have to stick with it. And it's about a repetitive story and a message. And I think, especially with our live endorsements, and my friend Howie from Robert Irwin Jewelers, I think he's a testament to this. He owns a local jewelry store. And I think, I know 2 or 3 guys on the station who have got engaged, and they tell the story of, I went in. But when you hear a local personality like Jeffrey talking about getting married and picking that out and how good the process was, or going to Sleepy Z's and, I don't want a cheap mattress. I want a good mattress at a good price that's fair, but they're going to go into your store because they're hearing the story. And there's not a quick fix to that. You have to hear the story over and over again. That's why they have jingles. That's why there's people telling the story multiple times. So I appreciate you saying that. And if anybody's interested in advertising, call Scott Spiropoulos here at the station, or just message us through the website. There's a contact link to our website. We'd love to have you aboard to tell your story. So
I didn't know Scott was with the station now. That's great.
Yeah, Scott, Amy Spiropoulos' husband, Scott, is our sales manager now. So
awesome.
Scott is making it happen.
I had, my sales rep, Christy Evans, was spectacular.
He is great.
Yes. Yeah, she was so personable. I'm sure she's still, and she really cared. She cared about the success of the business. And I could tell you, you said steroids, it was like a horse steroid shot. I mean, it changed literally within just a few months. My business changed from advertising on the station. And I can tell you that
I remember your campaign, and you had guys talking about it, and that was important.
Yeah. And people, and you mentioned it, people trust Gary, people trust Jeff, people trust Jason and John and Giannato and Jeffrey. And that's what happens, is because they listen to them so much, they trust them. And when they say, hey, this is where you need to go, that's where they go.
Yeah. And I mean, our guys turn down live endorsements too. And I've personally turned down endorsements because it's easy to say the story of a business, but I do think you need to be genuine about it. Otherwise, you're doing an injustice to the listeners and your friends. And I'll be careful here. I don't want to tell the client or rat anybody out. I don't believe they're on the station anymore. But I turned down a company because a friend of my wife's from her office used this product or place. And that's when I knew I had to stop doing endorsements for that particular client. And I did. I told my boss that I didn't want to do that. So it's sincere. I think it's a good form of advertising. Radio does get results. It works. It just takes that message being told over and over again, whether it's Sleepy Z's, Robert Irwin Jewelers, or any of our partners. And our partners are important. You know, we have a client called Red River Toyota that just presented a wolf event that we did on the Bluff on Highland, and they're out in Wynn. And they had never advertised on the radio until they advertised with our group, and that's the Wolf and 92.9. And they sponsored that Wolf event. But that, I feel like it's brought people across the river, right? Because your first inclination when you're buying an automobile, especially in that competitive space now, is to go maybe to the Pike or over here around the corner. But I thought that was a unique strategy for them to kind of reach out of the box and brand themselves as just across the river. And people know where that's at. If you get on 55, you'll hit it. So yeah, I'm a big believer in radio. I'm also, it's all I've ever known since I was 18.
Right.
But I've just seen it, especially for dedicated clients. And that's why I keep saying that over and over again. I think so many people, it can be a steroid shot, but you can't mention something twice, because as I tell our guys, when they tell a story, you have to recycle it. And they may have heard you tell the story about, that John Moran is a top 15 player at 11 a.m., but he's still a top 15 player, and that story is relevant at 1 o'clock as well. So it's the same with advertising. You have to tell it and then tell it again to reach all of the listeners, no matter where they're at or who they're listening to or what time.
Absolutely. What motivates you and drives you to keep getting better?
Oh, wow. I think my family and my colleagues and my friends, and just you kind of owe it to yourself if you get one of these jobs, because for me, like, Memphis is market 50, and we're not in the top 10. I've had opportunities to leave and go to bigger stations and bigger markets, but I told myself if I was going to do this job, you don't want to let anybody down, and you want to do it well, because there's a lot of people who love to have the job. So, and I think all the guys feel that way. It's hard to do these shows. I think the guys make it sound really easy to do radio shows. And I have so many people that say, I could do a radio show or host a show. I could do what Gary does. You might, but can you do it Monday through Friday, 365, or even 300 times, and replicate it and make it as good as the last one, with as good of a story, with people you've talked to or interviews that we've done, and do that day in and day out? It's very difficult to replicate Monday through Friday from 9 to 6. It takes, I think, everything we've got to put because I think that the standard is pretty high. I think these guys put so much on themselves. Sometimes we have to kind of don't put so much pressure on yourself, because people just, at the end of the day, want to hear the stories and want to hear these guys tell the story of Memphis, I think. And it can, if you put, and this is really, I guess, any walk of life, right? If you want to be successful, you put a lot of pressure on yourself. Sometimes that can not be productive. The opposite. I talk a lot about vibe around here, and the guys they make fun of me for it, but it's true. I mean, if you walk into a bar and there's a bad vibe, you leave the bar.
Right.
And I think a radio station is the same way. You can tell if people aren't having fun on the radio, or if they're upset. But you can tell if they're happy, and you're probably likely to, if they're having a good time and they like each other, you're probably likely to stick around. And that was one of the other things a lot of other program directors have told me that have listened to the station. They're like, the difference I hear when I listen to your station is it generally sounds like everybody working there likes each other. And that's true, I think. And I think that it's like any business, really. If you go into the store and everybody seems to be enjoying themselves, you tend to stick around a lot longer, whether it's a school, a workplace, or a radio station.
Absolutely. A few months ago, when I started the podcast, I had the privilege to interview, one of my idols, it's Gary Parrish. And, he has the #1 drive time show in the Memphis area. Every afternoon he's on Monday through Friday from 4 to 6. And his ratings are so high that I don't think it's even close, who's behind him. What is it about Gary that makes him so special and one of the best sports radio guys in the business?
Well, first of all, he's a workaholic. I think he's a workaholic. He's insane a little bit. He's a little crazy, which is a good recipe. And I'm kidding, of course.
Sure.
I worked with Gary as his producer for 10 years, so I can say these things.
Right.
But Gary's standard is super high, and he has, like, every day, I know how much he puts into putting the radio show together, and he prepares like nobody else's business. And then part of that is just the stuff he does with CBS in his normal job covering basketball, because he has so many contacts and so many stories that have happened over the years. And a lot of it is connected to Tiger basketball. And then obviously covering what Memphians are really excited about, which is college basketball. And so his natural job lends itself to a lot of really positive things, I think, for that show and for us. And we've really benefited from that. So that I would say those are the three things, you know, his energy, his information. It's funny, Jim Rome, he filled in for Jim Rome, and Jim Rome was here at the radio station. I know those guys have interacted because Jim used to be on the station, actually. I think when we very beginning, we might have had him on, and he did a show out of here. And I think at the end of it, when Gary was on his show, he said, bring in the energy and the information. And I think that's what makes Gary really good.
You guys also have, you know, two other successful shows with the Jeff Calkins show, you know, from 9 to 11, and Giannotto and Jeffrey from 2 to 4. Tell us a little bit about them.
So Jeff, again, much like Gary, he gets to tell the story of Memphis through this prism of this columnist, and he's the best at it because, you know, he's been doing it for a long time. He was also, he does what he wants to do. And I think that was one of the things we learned during COVID about Jeff's show that I learned was we talk about the things that are important to Memphis and to us. And sometimes that's not necessarily sports. And I know we're a sports brand, but it really works well for the radio station. Charles Fishman, who's like his best friend, we were about 3 months where we had no sports during COVID. It was that March, April, May, and June before the bubble of 2020, when it really was hitting. And we're running a sports station, and we're calling each other and we're texting and we're like, what are we going to do? Because we have a commitment to the advertisers. We have a commitment to ourselves to keep our jobs. You know, everybody's downsizing. There's a really bad climate, but we weren't a news talk station. We were an information source, and we started doing some unique things. And one of those was putting Charles on, you know, Jeff brought on Charles. I didn't do that. Jeff decided to do that. And so Charles now comes on every week, even post-COVID, because I think listeners just enjoy hearing him talk to his best friend, who's a New York Times best-selling author, and, you know, talking about being a captain on a tugboat in the Mississippi, or just about the economy or what's good, and it works. And that's Jeff. I think Jeff, that's why he does talks around town. That's why he writes so eloquently, and that's why his columns are great. And he's a great storyteller, like Gary and like all the guys. And I think that comes through loud and clear on his show.
What about Giannotto and Jeffrey?
So that was our newest show, because they came on when Eric left us. We brought on Giannotto and Jeffrey, and we were tasked with something similar to like when we replaced Chris with the 11 to 2 show with Jason and John. And that one offered a unique challenge because we had the Grizzlies play-by-play guy leaving, and we were replacing it with a new offering. And Mark was really starting to establish himself 3 years ago as an important columnist and storyteller, I think, in the city. And he had something unique to offer, which, and you hear it in the intro, and I've sort of talked about this. I think Mark my thing about Mark is a straight shooter. That's how I take it. I don't know. I think listeners take it that way too. He shoots the bullet straight and right at the target. And I think that's, I think all the guys do that, but I think when you hear Mark is very direct, and you hear it in his tone and the way he talks. And wouldn't you agree, Michael? I mean,
absolutely.
He's a very direct communicator on the radio. And pairing him with Jeffrey, I think was a nice balance, because Jeffrey's he started out as an anchor, and both of them now can anchor that show if one or the other is gone.
Sure.
And I think they've developed this friendship and this unit that is really something different than the other shows on the station, both with college football, because I think Jeffrey is extraordinary on college football. Jeffrey grew up here. And so Jeffrey can tell a lot of different stories and has a lot of information, both from the college football perspective. Mark really covers basketball well, because he's in the middle of it with the commercial appeal. And then the blend is something unique. And they prep a really good show. I really enjoy that show.
You know, Brad, you're also a really giving person, and you give back to the community here in Memphis. You've been involved with St. Jude, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Mid-South Food Bank, and even more. What is it inside you that inspires you to donate your time to these organizations?
Well, if they ask, I really feel an obligation. And only in recent years have I started saying no to things. And it's because of the age of my son and just my bandwidth. I think the one that I started out with first was the Serve Special Kids and Families. They were only Special Kids and Families when I moved here 18 years ago. And, I didn't have a son yet, so I was single and before I got married. And I went to see the work that they were doing because they had a center right here at Willow and Mount Moriah. They were in the church here on the corner. And I just saw where they were taking these unique kids who had challenges, and they were creating an atmosphere where they could go to school and learn how to do things and be a normal child. In fact, one of their students graduated from Bartlett High School, as one of the first with Down syndrome to graduate at the high school level from a school in Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. He graduated from Bartlett. And Jim Jaggers was on the Buzz at the time and got me involved with that. And we started doing their bunny run once a year. They were doing a plane pole, which is a lot of fun. I don't know if you remember the plane pole out in Millington. So they did these great events. So that was the start of it, getting out in the community. And I've always tried to do stuff in the community that's different. And that obviously was an important one. St. Jude obviously is a big one, and we do a lot. The Grizzlies partnership with us in the last couple of months, we've done a lot of things with the Grizzlies for St. Jude. They're doing a bowl-a-thon actually next month in Bartlett, and they're bringing out some of the players, and we want to partner with them, and we promote that. And we did a church health event back in July. But it is part of our public file to be involved with the community. I mean, radio stations technically they're supposed to do this. Some of them don't do it as much as they probably should. Some of them do just the bare minimum. I think we do a good job with the community. And as the program director, you sort of get centered in that. But I enjoy being out in the public and being amongst friends, especially after COVID. Like I was talking about that event at the Bluff on Highland, we did a Wolf concert, and we had Jimmy Allen, and that was for Le Bonheur. All the proceeds went to Le Bonheur. And it's just fun to be around friends and raise money and do those things and get to hang out with friends,
Absolutely. Oh, you talked about you met your wife, Stacy, at a Super Bowl party. Tell us a little bit about that and y'all's life together.
So January of 2005, I was hosting Mornings on the Buzz with Dana Fox, and we did some contest where and it was just like a call-in trivia contest. And this woman called in to play the contest, and she won the contest. And it was to have a full buffet and a spread and bring out some free Coors Light. I think Coors Light sponsored it. We were going to bring it out to their house. So we brought it to this house in East Memphis to our now friend, Greg. Greg was the host. We had it at her friend Greg's house. And I walk up, we're in the Buzz van. So there's a 9401, the Buzz van. So this is in February of 2005. It was the Eagles and the Patriots. And out walks this beautiful blonde woman. And I was just like, it was like love at first sight. And it was sort of love at first sight. It was like, wow, that's a beautiful woman. And she was wonderful too. And we kind of chatted through the night. I think she had a boyfriend at the time who was a police officer, which so I laid off, and I think her friends were referring to a police officer. So, I did no moves. She was a listener to the radio station and Super Bowl party. So that's where I met Stacy at that. And about 6 months later, I think she'd broken up, and she called the radio station. She probably doesn't like me telling this, but we got in contact through the radio station, and Dana said, you should probably go see her. Do you remember her? I was like, yeah, I think I remember her. And I remembered her. And so I'm like, well, where do I go? I just wanted, because it had been a few months, and we met at the Cockeyed Camel. Do you remember the Cockeyed
Absolutely.
Camel?
Where River Oaks is.
Yeah. So we met at the Cockeyed Camel. And actually, by that time, I think they had finally got the new Cockeyed Camel, which was around the corner. It's now a Mexican restaurant, I think, over by Ridgeway.
Yeah.
It's Amerigo's is kind of over that way.
Right.
And so we met at the sort of new Cockeyed Camel then, and then hit it off. And I'm like, I need to take you someplace nicer than the Cockeyed Camel. So I think we went to Amerigo's, and that was it. The rest was history. That was our first date, I think, was August 9th, 2015. we got engaged. I asked her to marry me on August 9th, 2016. And we married.
2006.
Yeah, 2006, beg your pardon. So it's
That's okay.
2005. I'm fast forwarding too
That's
much.
all right.
Years fast, like we talked about. Yeah, it was 2005, engaged in 2006, August, and then to the day that we had that first date. And then we got married the following Mother's Day of 2007. We've been married 15 years. So I married a Southerner. She's from here.
Awesome. And it's my philosophy, and I say this a lot on the podcast too, that there are no coincidences. How that happened, how you met, and everything, and then she contacts you. I mean, obviously that was supposed to happen.
No, it's that was a blessing. It really was, and it's the greatest thing that ever happened in my life for sure. Because that's why I'm here. I fall in love with the city, and I fell in love with my wife here, and I'm really blessed that way.
Awesome. You guys have a two-legged son, Jake, who you've talked about, who you said is 14, and you have a four-legged daughter, Peach.
Yeah.
I really enjoy her take in the mornings on LinkedIn, Sports for the Day, talking about what's going on at the station. She does a great job with you hanging out with her. Tell us about Jake and Peach and what they bring to you and Stacy's life.
Yeah. So I'll start with the dog. Not that Jake isn't important.
Sure.
So during COVID, we're all just churning out stuff, trying to, hang on. And I started doing the videos with Peach because she would sit in the chair next to me, and we're just like, what are we going to, and it really started from, that's why it's like the 92.9 report. And it really is addressed at, maybe if the guys from the station watch it, who knows, but what's Brad think are the big things we're probably going to be talking about today. And that all originated from, here's a dog, something to look forward to. I'm outside, it's COVID. And there were 3 months or 4 months or 5 months where it was dead. And then sometimes it's a little slow. And it's like, we're going to talk about this, and this. And man, I hope everybody's having a great day. And how about Peach? Here's my dog. Isn't she wonderful? And that was it. But now she expects a treat every morning. So I still take her out there, and she sits in the same spot and says hello and looks.
She's so good.
She is the most spectacular dog I had a wily little like a poodle mix breed when I was a kid, and the dog was crazy. When I got married to Stacy, we had a Rottweiler and a Newfoundland inside dog. So it took me a little bit to get used to the dog thing, because I wasn't a big inside dog person, because I've grown up in Southern Illinois near farms and kind of rural. But my wife, and she didn't tell me if she spent any money on Peach. I don't want to know. But she got her from an art dealer. She had got her because there was an artist who lived down in Jackson who was driving to the coast, and her mother got elderly and old, and she was driving back and forth and had the dog, couldn't take care of the dog. And Stacy's on these message boards. Then I guess Jake was 7 or 8 or 9. That dog's probably with us 5. He might have been about 8. Kid needs a dog, right, Brad?
Right.
Kid needs a dog. So she hooked up with this owner, and she drove down to Jackson, and voila, there's Peach. And it is Michael, this dog, I can't express it. She's the sweetest thing ever. Like, if humans could be as sweet as Peach, the world would be a special place. But it's like, she just makes life around the house wonderful. And you see it. That's Peach. But Jake loves his dog, and Jake is our 14-year-old. He's the two-legged person in the house that we are in charge of. He's a freshman in high school. He's in the band, he plays baseball, and he's a great student, unlike his dad. And so I'm fortunate, and we're really fortunate for both of them. We've been blessed.
That's great. How can people find you and follow you on social media?
You can go to Twitter at Brad Carson. I am not the president of the University of Tulsa or Tulsa University. Brad Carson, that's a different Brad Carson. So at Brad Carson on Twitter, Facebook.com/Brad Carson. Let's see, Instagram, Brad Carson 1, or I'm on LinkedIn as well with Michael and our friends there, or through the radio station website. There's a link there too.
My last question for you, Brad, what's the most important lessons that you've learned in life?
Wow, that is a big question. I should have looked at your other podcast at the very end that I knew this was the finale. Say the question again.
What's
Wow.
the most important lessons that you've learned in your life?
Oh, wow. The most important one, it's kind of probably what Dick Vitale says, don't ever give up, or Jimmy V, right? Don't give up. We talked a little bit about where their minds are at and their well-being, and how that's gotten difficult because of COVID and
Right.
the last few years and social media. And I think that even when we're looking at each other on Zoom, or we're talking to each other on the phone, or we meet somebody at a bar or in a store or at a synagogue or wherever, everybody's going through something. And I think it's important to recognize that, and to be there for those people, and to be there for each other. And so I think that's super important, to help each other. And I think our community's really done a good job of that the last couple of weeks, coming together, whether it's for runs that we saw in the midst of all the bad stuff, or the police officers doing such a great job to try to keep this community together. But I think all of that is related to, like, I've had really hard times, like when the buzz blew up, I was like really sad, because I moved here for that job and it went away. There were things go away and things change, but you've got to hang on to, it's going to be okay somehow, some way, even when really bad stuff happens, because the alternative is not good. So that's probably it. Just keep going, and my dad used to say, keep smiling. It used to be his saying. In fact, he owned a stamper, like when he would do invoices for his business that he had, is this big smiley face that just said, keep smiling. And I always thought that was a really good message.
Great.
So
I love that.
I like your idea too. Think big is a good way is a good message as well. But so those are some of the things. Keep smiling.
Awesome. Brad, I know you have an extremely busy schedule, both, personally and, managing the station. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. It's been a lot of fun.
Michael, it was a pleasure. And I'm really impressed with what you've done with all of the guests. All of the guests are amazing too. I give you credit. You've got some resources here for the city and the area, and I hope people continue to follow it. It's awesome to be part of it. So thank you.
Appreciate your time. I hope to have you on again sometime.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. Thanks, Brad.